Ottoman lands, Catherine sent out an overwhelming force to snuff out the rebellion. But even as this fire was being put out, a much worse specter flared up. Smallpox. Smallpox was still the bane of Europe. No one was safe from it, noble or commoner, king or priest. It had just burnt through the Austrian royal family, destroying their line of succession. And here Catherine was, never having contracted it. Perhaps worse still, here her son was, with whispers all around court of the uncertainty of his ever ascending the throne, because he had not yet suffered and survived the disease. Catherine herself said that she lived in fear of the disease every day. Too many people she had known, a doctor from Britain, to inoculate her. This science was fairly new at the time, and though the doctor she brought in was one of the experts in the field, everyone thought her mad. Many were convinced that she would die. But she lived. After a few small pustules and some aches, she was fit and forever inured against the disease. Soon she had her son inoculated too. But she didn't just do this for herself. She knew that her people were a wary, suspicious people, especially when it came to disease. She hoped that by her example, she could convince others to get inoculated too. And it worked. Soon, much of the court followed her example. In fact, she had inoculation stations set up in most of the provinces, and a large number of Russians benefited from this, one of the true wonders of modern medicine. There would be other plagues during her tenure as Empress, some unthinkably terrible, but this one great lingering fear, this one tragedy that once fell on almost every house, this she was able to do something about. By the end of her reign, nearly 2 million Russians would be inoculated. But with the home front quiet, and her efforts on medicine and childcare taking root, it was time again to look beyond the borders of Russia. Or perhaps more accurately, to the borders of Russia, and how they might be expanded. Join us next time for changing alliances, sprawling wars, and the partition of Poland. At a young age, Catherine had been married to an emotionally stunted young man who never loved her. For years she had remained trapped, until she was won over by a callous rake who later abandoned her. She then met a man of whom she was very fond, and whom she would eventually make the King of Poland. But none of these men had truly won her heart. No, the man to be her first great love turned out to be the same man who had helped her ascend the throne years before, Grigory Orlov. For 13 years, she was faithful to him, but that was soon to end. Grigory Orlov was brave and bold, never flinching at danger or personal risk. But he was also boorish, rude, and impertinent. He was ill-educated, with no interest in any of the Enlightenment ideas that Catherine so fancied. Catherine would once write that, despite it all, she would have stayed with him for a lifetime, if only he stayed with her. But Grigory sought danger. He was restless, unfaithful, and, worst of all to Catherine, he had grown distant. She sent him off on a diplomatic mission. There he failed, displaying the same arrogance that he had displayed at court, the same uncouth rudeness and sense of superiority that had gotten him hated by her nobles. But it didn't really matter at this point. Catherine had sent him away because she was already done with him. Too long had she suffered his infidelity, his harsh words, his sense that he was superior to the Empress herself. As his replacement, Catherine picked up a safe, pretty, dull young man who she would rapidly come to call the most boring man in all of Russia. She found her time with him interminable. Not because he didn't try, and not because he was unrefined like Orlov, but because he never had anything interesting to say. But then, she found Potemkin. He had first caught her attention by giving her his sword knot on the day she took the throne. He had performed numerous services for Catherine. He'd been her envoy to Sweden, bringing word of the palace coup. He had been her lay representative on the Most Holy Synod. He'd been paymaster of the army, and he'd even been appointed as guardian of exotic peoples at Catherine's Great Assembly on Laws. He had served valiantly in the Turkish War and won himself renown at every turn. He was a cultured man, not only well-studied, but intellectually eager and curious. He had won the top honors at university and then dropped out. He loved theology, but always, especially after being appointed guardian of exotic peoples, kept the company not only of Orthodox ministers, but also rabbis, old believers, Cossacks, and even members of the tribal religions still alive in the more remote parts of Russia. He was a great wit, known for impressions and being able to mimic people's voices, which I guess was considered high comedy in those days. He could make Catherine
continuar sempre se ligando a partida de boa. Se eu posso vai na frente aí, filho. Tomando conta do local. Ah, já é dele.
Cover me, I'm reloading! There are no hostiles at Alpha.
Vamos ganhar essa ilha. Tá de boa.
I'm moving! I'm throwing a frag grenade! Look Alpha. Alpha's under attack. We just taken Alpha. We've got hostiles attacking Alpha. I'm using smoke.
cacete, mano.
I gotta reload.
Ó, cadê aqui na base?
Enemy contact southwest of me. Give me cover, I'm loaded up. I need a sec, I gotta load. Hey, I gotta reload. Crack grenade out.
Nossa senhora.
God damn it! Crack, go to back.
Ia pegar na faquinha, pô, tristeza.
Eu sei quem gosta. Tem que se fuder e acabou. Tá ok? Mas o que é isso? Que mapa, fiquei. Não, pode não, velho.
Vai market aí, galera.
Ah, vai pro onde mesmo, vai. Vem, não.